Good afternoon. As a result of a technology glitch, we were unable to record the entire electric transportation webinar held on April 11th, 2024. This opening presentation by Palmetto Clean Cities Electrification Coalition and Henrico County, Virginia were unfortunately not recorded. We are re-recording this introduction and will be combining it with the recording from the webinar. Welcome to the Electrification Transportation webinar. My name is Renee Kelly. I am the Clean Transportation Coordinator for the South Carolina Energy Office and the Director of Palmetto Clean Fuels. The Clean Cities Coalition Network is a coordinated group of more than 75 active coalitions covering nearly every state, helping local decision makers and fleets understand and implement alternatives and renewable fuels. Idle reduction measures, fuel economy improvements, new mobility choices, and emerging transportation technologies. On the left, you can see all of the Southeast Coalition Clean Cities coalitions, as well as Palmetto Clean Fuels on the right, which is a statewide coalition working with all of South Carolina. Clean Cities coalitions provide assistance, information, and resources to successfully plan and execute alternative fuel vehicles and fueling infrastructure projects, whether that is providing technical assistance for an ongoing project, making connections to the Vehicle Technology Office funding opportunities, or facilitating local and national partnerships. These activities, combined with access to the information, technology assistance, funding, and project planning capabilities, makes Clean Cities the successful program that it is today. The agenda for the electric transportation webinar includes this introduction, CFI awardee results. We'll have two presentations, and then an IRA tax credit for electric vehicles. After those presentations, we will have questions for the presenters, and then we will roll out into breakout rooms with technical assistance providers. We'll have 3 breakout rooms, a grant management 101 breakout room for folks that are just getting started with their grants, developing a competitive application breakout room for those that have specific questions about grants that they are pulling together, and then an IRA tax credits and direct pay for electric vehicles breakout room for those folks that have questions on what was presented today. After the breakout rooms, we will reconvene and recap on what we've heard so far. Now I will introduce Emma Hines, who is the policy manager for the Electrification Coalition. The Electrification Coalition is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that develops and implements a broad set of strategies to facilitate the widespread adoption of electric vehicles to overcome economic, public health, and national security challenges that stem from America's dependence on oil. And now I will hand it over to Emma Hines.
Well, thank you. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm David Haynes with the Atlanta Regional Commission, and our CFI application, you see the title of that here on the screen, Charging the Atlanta Region, with the subtitle, Transportation System Electrification Strategy that Works for Everyone. So before I get into the details of our application, I want to give you a little bit of background on what ARC is, our different roles and responsibilities, because it really did inform how we approach not only this particular funding opportunity, but discretionary funding opportunities in general. So I work in the transportation department, and the Federally required metropolitan planning organization responsibility falls within transportation. And if you're not familiar with what an MPO is, they are responsible for, in any metro area around the country, developing both short range and long range transportation plans. So obviously electrification is a big deal for us right now, learning more about how that's going to happen. But we have a lot of other functions other than transportation within ARC. We also have some transportation land use responsibilities under state law as a regional commission. We are the area agency on aging for several of our counties, a workforce development board. We even have some security planning responsibilities through the Department of Homeland Security. We house the Urban Area Security Initiative staff for the Atlanta region. And we also do water and wastewater planning. Some of our staff report to the Metropolitan North Georgia Water Planning District. So we really are a very multidisciplinary agency. And you see that elaborated in our mission statement, where our overall intent, our mission, our prime directive is to foster thriving communities through a variety of planning and investments. And so one way that we are approaching that mission is through an initiative called Reconnecting the Region. And this is a play on the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods program, which is also under the Federal Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, a specific program. We thought that we would build upon that basis and use that as an approach for how we approach all of our discretionary funding opportunities. And what you're looking at here is when I-20 was constructed through downtown Atlanta back in the 1950s. It was intentionally located to divide minority neighborhoods from white neighborhoods, but it became more than just a physical dividing line. It has really sort of resonated throughout the decades, and it frames a lot of how the Atlanta region has developed over the past 60, 70, 80 years. And anybody who is familiar with Atlanta and has spent time here, you're familiar with the idea of north of I-20, south of I-20, and everything that means in terms of the favorite half of the region when it comes to economic development, quality of life, infrastructure. And so it's much more pronounced on the north side of the region in terms of the quality of the living environment here in the Atlanta region. The south side of the region has lagged pretty significantly, exacerbated by that decision where I-20 was located back in the 1950s. So we are orienting, reconnecting the region around that greater north-south divide. So it's more than just a specific piece of infrastructure. It's literally the north half of the region, the south half of the region, how we can level the playing field a little bit. And even though Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods is one specific program, we see that theme running through several of the major transportation discretionary programs. So we're playing off of that in our approach to all of these opportunities. So as part of the Reconnecting the Region initiative, last year we identified 6 catalytic projects, and you see 3 of those shown here, one of which is a regional electrification program. 3 of those we have advanced through partnerships with various local governments. We were the lead on 2 of these. The Stitch through the city of Atlanta, that's a capping project over the I-75, 85 downtown connector here in downtown Atlanta. But the other 2, we were the lead applicant, and the CFI application was one of those that has received funding under the Reconnecting the Region initiative. And you see the EV charging infrastructure. This is what I was talking about. When you look at maps of the Atlanta region, almost any metric that you might want to look at, you will notice a disparity between the north half of the region and the south half of the region. So you see I-20 kind of splitting down the middle there. The current infrastructure, as you would expect, has been driven by the market to date, and that's been heavily oriented towards those parts of the region that are more densely developed, that are more affluent, which happens to be the north side here in the Atlanta region. So you see a lot more dots on the map north of I-20 than you do south of I-20. And in fact, the only real cluster that you see south of I-20 is right there around the airport, just inside the perimeter, if you're familiar with Atlanta. So our application attempted to get at this imbalance, and the full application was about $15 million. A third of it was for community charging and 2/3 was for corridor charging. And we actually did talk with a lot of private sector entities to try and come up with a concept for what we wanted to advance as a region. This is a little bit unusual. You know, the federal procurement process, this is not normally how it works, but we are not, you know, electric vehicle industry experts. We don't know electricity. We don't know how much this infrastructure costs, what you can do, and all of that. So we were pretty transparent in our application that this concept was developed in partnership with Volta on the community side and Racetrack on the corridor side. But we did make very clear to them that because these are federal funds, we will have to go through a fair and open procurement process. So at the end of the day, they may not end up being the final private sector partners that we contract with. And ultimately, the community component, the $6 million was funded, the corridor piece was not. And as was mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different markets when it comes to EV charging. There's the need for people as they just go about their day-to-day activities, going to the grocery stores, going to the drugstore, movie theaters, whatever, be able to charge up. There's the home and workplace component where you have longer dwell times, 8, 10, 12 hours at a time. And then the heavy vehicle fleet freight component, which is a completely different animal in some respects. But for this application, we really focused on those day-to-day needs as people kind of go about and make multiple short stops around the region. And you see nested there on the left side, we also wanted to make sure that we weren't overlooking bicycle and personal mobility devices like scooters, because those kind of fit between those first two categories. And a lot of the conversation is about, full-size automobiles. Those types of mobility devices tend to get overlooked a little bit in the conversation. So our application, as with the previous applicant, we wanted to make clear that we understand the full range of needs and that this application was the first of potentially several that we will consider advancing. And that's being informed by an electrification plan that we're currently developing at ARC. So this was our basic concept, and this is what we'll put into an RFP for procurement later on this year. We want to implement 75 to 100 level 2 charging stations, and each of those would have 4 ports or more potentially, depending on what the contractor ends up proposing. The real catch is that we want that electricity for the consumer to be free of charge. And the reason for that is we're emphasizing disadvantaged communities where the incremental cost of an EV may be cost prohibitive compared to, just going with a traditional internal combustion engine. There's definitely a premium that you pay still for electric vehicles. Hopefully that will, diminish or continue to diminish over time. But if we can provide that free electricity, maybe that's a little bit of incentive for somebody to be able to justify going with an electric vehicle versus an internal combustion engine. And I think I've probably hit on most of these other bullet points. So I'll go ahead and move on in the interest of time. So we've also received a lot of inquiries about how to be involved in this project, not only from people in the industry who want to be involved in the construction contracts, but also people who, want to know, can I get one of these at my businesses? And just, people who are generally interested in the process, academics, researchers, the general public. So we're channeling all of that into an online database where we're capturing their contact information and letting them indicate their area of interest in the project. And we're working on an FAQ page that we will share with them, and we intend to have a dedicated website and a regular monthly or quarterly newsletter that will start going out once we get under contract with Federal Highway. To close out, where I think our application may have stood out among so many other good applications around the country, and this is just my thoughts. Obviously, we don't know the inner workings of Federal Highway and how the decisions were made. But I do think our agency, the multidisciplinary nature of everything that we do, we were able to bring that larger regional scope to the challenge that we have with rolling out EV infrastructure. And we can draw on a lot of resources, not only the technical expertise, but also the data and even some funding. We, as an MPO, get some formula funding through USDOT. We committed about $880,000 of that to supplement the CFI funds, and we're going to use that for safety planning and engagement work. And as I mentioned, we were very thoughtful about, presenting this as a first step of multiple steps that we need to really make charging infrastructure ubiquitous. And we did go ahead and bring in those private sector partners as collaborators on the application, just so that we were able to provide a level of technical detail and specificity that we would never be able to do as planners. And lastly, there is a lot of data in the application. I didn't get into that in this presentation, but we were very clear that this will be a very data-driven approach, and making sure that we're capturing information about where these charging stations will go, what the demographics and socioeconomic characteristics are of the people who are using them, to make sure that we are meeting all of those Justice 40 requirements, and also working towards one great region. And that is the conclusion of my presentation. Here's my contact information. And I think at this point, I've been asked to transfer it over to Samantha Jacoby with the Center for Budget and Policy Priorities. So thank you, and look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Great, thanks, David. I will share my screen. 1 second. Okay, here we go. I think that worked. Yeah, so hi everyone. My name's Samantha Jacoby. I work for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We are a nonpartisan research and policy institute that seeks to advance federal and state policies to reduce poverty and inequality and expand opportunity. So my work in this space focuses on I work on federal tax, so I focus on the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits and direct pay, which is the tool to help non-tax paying entities use the tax credits. So that's kind of where I'm coming from in this space. It's been great to hear from everyone on this presentation. So quickly, just a disclaimer, I am not providing formal legal advice today. I will include a slide later on that includes some links to resources that have more detailed information, places you can go to get some of that more tax advice. And then quickly, what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to give a background on the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits for electric vehicles and charging infrastructure, and then I'll move into discussing direct pay. On direct pay, I'll give a brief overview of a few key issues that are that's in the Treasury Department guidance on direct pay, and the process for claiming the credits through direct pay. I know we're short on time, so this is going to be pretty high level, and hopefully we can get into a little bit more detail during Q&A. Okay, so you'll be able to look at it. Yes. And then, so first I'll go into a little bit of background on the tax credits. The first one is the Qualified Commercial Clean Vehicle Credit. So for fully electric vehicles, this is a credit that's worth up to 30% of a vehicle's cost, capped at $40,000 per vehicle for vehicles over 14,000 pounds, and a max of $7,500 per vehicle for smaller vehicles less than 14,000 pounds. There is a limit. The limit is basically the incremental cost of an electric vehicle compared to a comparable gas or diesel powered vehicle. And then one other thing to note on this credit, there are not domestic assembly or content requirements, unlike some of the other IRA credits. That could be helpful as you're thinking through applications. There is an approved manufacturer list that the IRS has on their website that you can just check to make sure it's on that list. The next credit is for charging infrastructure. This is sorry, I skipped ahead. Whoops. This is a credit that's also worth 30%. So 30% up to $100,000 for charging property. Important to note, this is a place-based credit. So charging infrastructure property has to be located in either a non-urban area or a qualifying low-income census tract, and I'll talk about what those mean in a second. This credit does have labor standards attached. So if those aren't met, if those prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements aren't met, the credit is worth 6% of costs instead of 30%, still up to $100,000. So I mentioned the non-urban area and low-income community requirement. So if you're talking about putting charging infrastructure in a non-urban area, it's basically a census data definition. It's a census tract in which at least 10% of the census blocks are not designated as urban areas. And then the low-income census tract, it's the same definition that's used in the code for what's known as the new markets tax credit. So it's an existing definition. Basically, the poverty rate for residents in that census tract is it's a relatively high poverty rate, over 20%, or the median income of residents is relatively low, 80% or less compared to the area median. You don't need to do that analysis. There are some tools that Treasury and the Department of Energy have put together that you can use to determine if a census tract where you want to put charging property would qualify. So on the next slide, I'll show a couple of those things. So the Treasury official guidance came out earlier this year on this, Treasury Notice 2024-20. It sort of explains what these two types of tracts are, and then includes two appendices, Appendix A and Appendix B, that just list census tracts that qualify. But probably easier than that is to use DOE's mapping tool. I put a link in the slide here, and you can just search by address. It's not a guarantee that a census tract would be qualifying, but you can go in and check and then confirm in the appendices to the Treasury guidance. So here I put in a screenshot. I just kind of put in for fun and the address of the South Carolina Energy Office. Looks like that office is in an eligible census tract because it fits the low income definition. Okay, and so the next slide just shows a quick example for a hypothetical fleet transition. I'm not going to go through the example because we're getting short on time, but in this example, let's say a city wanted to do a fleet transition and install some charging infrastructure at a cost of $900,000. Assuming they meet all the requirements, they would get a tax credit through direct pay of $180,000. So that's a significant portion of the cost to help enable faster cost recovery and fleet transition. And so how do we make this happen? It's through direct pay, because as we know, tax credits don't really help entities that don't pay taxes. So how do local governments use the tax credits? It's direct pay. It's really just a financing mechanism. If you think about it like that, it's a tool that local governments can use to access tax credits and receive cash refunds from the federal government. If you think about it like that, it's effectively a grant, but it's an uncapped grant that doesn't have a competitive application process. So as long as you meet the requirements, you fill out your tax return and you can get the credit. But again, the most important thing to know, right, because it's structured as a tax credit, there is a tax return filing requirement. That's an unfamiliar process for most state and local government entities. So there is a pretty steep learning curve. But I think the hope is that as this sort of moves forward, this is a 10-year commitment to provide these tax credits through direct pay over time, that hopefully this will become a pretty standardized process. So again, in addition, there's a tax return requirement, but before you even go about filing a tax return, there's something called pre-registration that all entities that are trying to access direct pay need to complete. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So I think, two takeaways from this, right? You have to do, you go through, you install your project, all of that. But you have to do pre-registration, and then after that, a tax return. So that's sort of the two kind of deliverables in this whole process. Yeah, so next I'll talk a little bit about some of the Treasury guidance. For those who have been kind of following this for a while, the final guidance came out this like about a month ago or so. It's pretty similar to what was in the proposed rules that were released last summer. There are a couple of areas where they've either kind of like explained a bit more, changed things slightly. Nothing like I would say like super major, but a couple things just to note. The first is around what people call stacking. The electric vehicle and charging credits that I mentioned before can stack with other types of subsidies like tax exempt grants and forgivable loans. So all these wonderful grants that people are talking about can stack with the, say, 30% tax credit up to 100% of the property's costs. So you can't, like, there's a rule it's called the excess benefit rule in the guidance that you can't like profit off of subsidies. You can't, get all these grants and tax credits above 100% of the cost. But it's, it's a pretty generous rule. The stacking in the final guidance didn't change too much, but they did include a few clarifying changes and some examples that could be helpful. The next thing, just quickly, I want to talk about partnerships. I'm talking here about legal partnerships where like two entities co-own property through, say, like a limited liability company. The partnership is generally not eligible for direct pay, even if all the individual partners are owners and that entity would be eligible. Like if two cities form an LLC to co-own a project. That's it's partly just a statutory text thing that's just the way it is. But what Treasury did do is they issued proposed guidance that would allow some joint ownership arrangements for electric generation technologies. But as written, that doesn't apply to, or doesn't seem to apply to electric vehicle ownership or charging infrastructure credits. So I just wanted to flag that and just know if folks are out there have discussed some potential partnership arrangements in the electric vehicle context, that could be useful feedback to Treasury because, as I mentioned, it doesn't seem like their joint ownership guidance would apply to electric vehicles. So they're collecting public comments. I just wanted to flag that if folks want to talk about that later, we can do that. Another point from the guidance I wanted to mention on amended returns, the proposed guidance was pretty strict on you have to put everything in on time and no amended returns. Still have to meet the deadlines, but they did include a little bit more flexibility for entities that, let's say, did everything on time, claimed direct pay as they were supposed to, but maybe they miscalculated something in their credit. They can then go back and amend their return. So that is helpful. Another thing is a tax year issue. I'm not going to talk about this because now I'm getting shorter on time, but this is for if there are any entities out there who installed projects in sort of the early months of 2023 and are now trying to claim direct pay for 2023, that's relevant. This tax year issue is relevant for those types of entities. So if anybody has is in that situation, we can talk after. But essentially it's about like what your tax year should be. Should it be your fiscal year or should it be your calendar year? And The upshot is it should be your calendar year. But only for entities that installed projects in early months of 2023. And then finally, tax return due date. The tax return due date is 4.5 months from the end of your tax year. The final guidance made clear that there is an automatic 6-month extension for anyone. If you want it, you don't have to use it. But yeah, so I'm moving on. The process for direct pay. You go ahead and you install your project, you buy your EV fleets, you install your charging infrastructure in compliance with tax credit rules, work with your financial officers and in-house counsel on that, and then you go ahead and pursue the credits. So the first step after that is pre-registration with the IRS. There's an online portal, which I've linked to here. There are some other resources later, including, I think, a very helpful user guide from the IRS and some IRS office hours to get some questions answered. Timing for pre-registration, the guidance really just says enough time to get your registration numbers. After the pre-registration process, each property will get a registration number that has to then be on the tax return. So you want to make sure there's enough time between when you fill out the pre-registration portal and when your return is due. Best practice, we're hearing from folks, 120 days before your tax return is due, you want to submit that pre-registration. So yeah, and then tax return, the tax return, I mentioned it's 4.5 months after the end of your tax year, and then a 6-month auto extension if you want it. For most government entities, the tax return that you will fill out is the Form 990T, as well as source credit forms, supporting documentation. So there is like kind of a lot to fill out and submit. And then timing of payment after the tax return is processed. So at some point after that, the refund will be submitted. And then, yeah, the last thing I really wanted to just plug, the IRS has been doing these office hours for entities that want to, that just have questions and they want to get them answered from IRS representatives. There are 2 upcoming ones in April, and so far they don't have any scheduled for after April, but my guess is they will schedule some more later. So just keep an eye on that. And then my last slide is a list of resources that I found to be pretty helpful. I think in particular, right, so I mean, some of these are things that you need, the portal and regulations and stuff like that, and the tax returns, but the user guide, the pre-registration user guide, has like all these screenshots and really walks you through the process of pre-registration. So that's really helpful. And then the last link is I mean, I check this all the time. It's direct pay resources from a group called Lawyers for Good Government. They are just doing some amazing work putting together technical assistance for entities that are seeking to claim direct pay. They have an FAQ bank, and you can, most likely your question's already in there and it's been answered. If not, they have an intake form, and they are taking new questions all the time. So yeah, I will stop there and pass it back to Renee
Yes.
for Q&A.
Yes.
All right. Thanks.
Thank all the presenters for providing all that great information. There's so much information. We have recorded this webinar, and so I'm hoping that everybody will get a chance to review the webinar and come up with even more questions. But to get started on the questions, I'm just going to go through the list we have here. The first question was, how does a municipality collaborate if they own their own utility? And I think the best, I would say the best thing there, and people please chime in, would be to collaborate with the community organizations that are in your area. That would be a great way to get the collaboration going, to find out what their needs are, and would help with the relations and the community as well. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll just note, because I think this question came in during my presentation when I was mentioning collaboration with the utility. That is going to be extremely important just for the idea of making sure that you have the load to support the charging that you want to put in. Utilities are going to be, which maybe it'll be easier if the municipality does own their own utility. You'll have much easier conversations of being able to identify areas where you might not need a substation or new substation put in or something like that, making sure you can put in the load, because that's where projects get really expensive and end up taking a long time, and you have a harder time meeting that 12-month timeline. Is if you submit an application for a project, it gets awarded, and then utility comes back and says, whoa, 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 none of that is possible. So that was the intention behind that comment.
Okay, and then the next question was, can you elaborate on the community engagement reporting? And I'm not sure if that was for you, Emma, or if that was for Carrie.
Based on the timestamp, I believe that came in during Carrie's presentation, and again, unfortunately, she had to leave early. But I'll try to take a stab at this one. I mean, I think from our perspective, there's a number of organic community engagement methods for this type of project. So first would be our planning and zoning process. So, you know, to the extent this requires a building permit or any kind of zoning or planning updates, there would be sort of a check-in anywhere with the community. In terms of outside of that, we have done quite a bit of public relations on this topic. So when we were initially awarded the grant, there was a fair amount of positive press coverage, and so Henrico as a county has historically been very encouraging of members of the community reaching out, and so we did get quite a bit of honestly supportive outreach upon the press releases and all the information getting out about the award, including from community members. So in terms of specific targeted outreach plans, I don't have enough information to answer that, but I do think there's sort of some organic things that are already happening.
Cool. There were many questions that were provided. Some were answered in the chat, so I'm not going to go through those. I know that there were some questions for Carrie, and she provided her contact information. The next question, our MPO is located in Virginia and Tennessee. Can we include localities in more than one state in the application? Has anybody worked with someone that is doing more than one state in their application?
Not worked directly with the communities, but I know that there was an application submitted, I think, in the Washington, Oregon area between both states. So as long as you have the partnerships between both states and a plan to kind of identify how that funding is getting distributed, shouldn't be a problem.
Next question. So you didn't have all the sites okay, this is for David. So you didn't have all the sites finalized for your application? Question mark. David, did you have any comments on your sites, the finalization of your sites?
Yeah, what I would say with that is in our RFP, when we secure the private sector partner, one thing that we will emphasize is that we want companies that already have existing access agreements with these private locations, the shopping centers, the shopping center managers, the property owners, grocery stores, etc. So we know that those companies will probably come to the table with basically a menu of eligible sites that are in their portfolio. But we also want to have the flexibility, and this is where the community engagement and outreach comes in. If there are certain gaps around the region, once we look at that map of locations where they can quickly go in and build charging stations, if there are gaps, we want the ability to talk with the local governments, talk with the communities, and figure out what additional locations could be good candidates. So no, we do not have specific sites, but we expect that the entities that we contract with will come with a starter list, I guess is one way to put it.
Next question. Where did the funding for the community engagement come from in the Atlanta example, David?
Under the community component of CFI, you are allowed to use a small percentage of that for outreach. So I don't recall the specifics of our budget. I'll have to go back since that was literally almost a year ago that it was submitted, but some portion of the funding was set aside for that. But in addition to that, as the MPO, we get Surface Transportation Block Grant Program formula funds from Federal Highway, and we set aside $880,000 for some combination of safety analysis, community engagement, and environmental review sort of activities to sort of turbocharge the CFI federal funding. So it's kind of a melding of the CFI funds plus the STBGP funds that we already have programming discretion over.
All right, that was the last question that I have. I think we are about to transition into the break rooms. Michael, did you want to say anything?
Absolutely. We will get a chance in the breakout rooms to ask additional questions as well as talk more in depth with several of the TA providers. Just a reminder, this will be broken out based upon your assignment or your selection upon registration. So I'll be opening those up momentarily, and then we'll have about a 5-minute reconvening back in the main room prior to ending the webinar. But thank you all for joining, and you'll be assigned to the breakout rooms momentarily.
All right.
All
Good
right.
morning, everyone. Thanks for joining here. We are in the Developing Competitive Grant Applications group. I believe that should be correct for everyone. And Renee, thank you for joining me here as well.
Yes. Taking notes.
All right, excellent. I'm going to share my screen very briefly here. I have just a handful of slides on SSDN. First of all, Southeast Sustainability Directors Network. Can I just verify with a hand or something that you all can see those? You can hear me okay? Cool. So I may have a few more slides than I really need. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, understanding I think the most fruitful part of this will be our discussion and Q&A. So just a little bit of background on SSDN. So we are a peer-to-peer network of local government members in sustainability and resilience work. Over 120 members in the states that you see here on the slide: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, Mississippi, North and South Carolina, Tennessee, and Virginia. We really focus on a lot of peer-to-peer learning, sharing best practices, similar to what you've heard already today with some of the case studies on CFI. We also have a policy arm that is very focused on the kind of engagement at the state level with our members and kind of working on state policy work and making sure that we understand, each of our members understands policy gaps, policy needs, and also where they might want to engage at the state level to support their local government initiatives. And we focus on a lot of different areas around technical expertise, of course, racial equity being a large component of the work we do in sustainability and resilience too, and focusing on community grants. So we have two main arms within SSDN. One is the policy side, which I mentioned a little bit about already. And the other is the federal programs arm, which Michael Dexter, of course, heads up, and then I am a part of as well. And I want to go into a little bit more detail on some of those offerings within the federal programs and the funding that we have. So we have multiple initiatives. They all really work in tandem and work together, but they are a little bit different. So we have the Southeast Sustainability or Sustainable Recovery Center, which is really just working much more member focused on those local governments that are just looking for a little more connectivity, understanding to federal funding coming down the way, federal technical assistance, any kind of programs that might support the work they're doing locally, and make sure that they are aware of that and can access those programs and resources. SSDN was also, has recently become an EPA Region 4 Multimedia Environmental Finance Center, which really focuses on helping provide technical assistance, specifically focused on water and environmental justice issues and topics there. And that is not just member focused, it is really broad to all communities within that EPA Region 4 area. And so while SSDN is a member network, we also have specific programs that support communities that do not have to be members. They're just within either Region 4 or within the Southeast generally. And that gets me to the Local Infrastructure Hub, which is the program that I help run. And that actually includes all of the states that you just saw on the previous slide, but it also includes Texas, which is not, we don't have any member SSDN communities in Texas, but we serve Texas for the Local Infrastructure Hub program. So I just wanted to call that out. And it is focused eligibility to do very specific technical assistance to local governments and community-based organizations. So I want to highlight that as well. Community-based organizations, nonprofits, or local governments both are eligible to apply for Local Infrastructure Hub support, which is essentially technical assistance in some capacity I'll get into in a second. But the crux of the eligibility is ensuring that the projects that LIH supports, they must be addressing both climate impacts and promoting racial wealth equity. So racial wealth equity and advancing climate change or climate policies and programs. My email is down here, but I will share it in the chat in just a minute. A little more specific on the LIH program. Again, open to community-based organizations or local governments. And we kind of have three general kind of buckets of service types and technical assistance that we provide. We have a bench of technical assistance providers that, some of them are full on, just well experienced in federal grant writing. They understand NOFOs, they understand the rubrics in those funding opportunities, and they know what it takes to be as competitive as possible and get those federal grants across the finish line. So in that grant proposal support bucket, we have quite a bit of support there in the technical assistance bench. Then we also have just project development. Again, we have expertise in workforce training programs, economic development, environmental justice, community engagement and facilitation, building science. So we have a lot of different areas of expertise, and we find that as we work with additional communities, we listen to their needs. If we don't have a support or a technical assistance expertise on our bench to support your community and the work you're doing, then we can go out and help find that expertise and bring it in. And then finally, on the community and stakeholder engagement, understanding that there are a lot of these grants that you're applying for now, especially with the focus on Justice 40 and collaborative partnership, really mean that you're going to have to build relationships among several different partners to really be competitive. And so we offer technical assistance simply in that stakeholder engagement, community engagement field. So how we frame all of this up in the offerings, we've got kind of three general options. Again, we do try and be as flexible as possible. This is an application process to receive LIH or Local Infrastructure Hub support. And I will give you a little more detail about that in a second. But there are three kind of categories. Option one is really, it is direct technical assistance. There are no dollar amounts exchanged between the LIH recipient and SSDN. It is essentially, if you apply for LIH assistance to do grant writing or receive some other technical assistance, we connect you with our bench of providers, and they directly provide that assistance to you. We already have them on contract, and that is a value of up to $30,000. So that could be to write that grant, to do some of that community engagement work, or other options. Those are just examples. And that is open to both local governments and CBOs. Option two is really available to community-based organizations specifically, and it is a combination of both some direct dollar capacity building support. So for instance, if a nonprofit is wanting to apply or wants to be a strong partner on a grant, they can apply for some direct dollar support that might go towards organizational capacity building. It could be a financial audit of their operations. It could be kind of an upgrade to a IT system or software financial system. or other. We're really quite flexible. Those are just some examples of the types of services that we've had requests for in the past. So they could get some direct dollar support and then specific technical assistance, again, similar to option one, to help really pull expertise from our bench and support that grant or support additional work that they need to help build their capacity. The intention here with the CBOs is to make sure that they take advantage of the ability to either apply for a grant, or if they just need more fundamental services to help them shore up or level up so that they are a long-term partner with you all as local governments or whatever sector you represent into the future going after federal funds. Then the option three is simply all direct dollar support with a ceiling. Again, all of this is a ceiling of up to $30,000 in value, but this could be up to $30,000 of direct capacity building dollars, again, in those similar kind of options that I explained before for community-based organizations. So with that, I do want to pause. Renee, I didn't know if you had anything else you wanted to share. Go
No,
ahead.
not at this time. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There was a question as to whether or not higher education institutions are eligible for hub support.
Good question. So our funder in this work is Bloomberg Philanthropies, and they were pretty specific that local governments or nonprofits, 501c3 nonprofits, can be the eligible recipients. However, what I will say is that we have been working with higher ed institutions, but it has been kind of indirectly as one of the collaborative partners on a grant, or they might partner with a community-based organization or local government to apply for LIH support. So they still might be a secondary recipient, but not a direct recipient.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Hey, Renee
Yes.
and Nick, this is Matt
Yeah.
at Henrico, and I would offer up some commentary here. With Henrico's application, similar to, I think, this round, we were looking at a very short runway, to get the grant application actually written. We had sort of been kicking around this idea for a little while, but we certainly did not have it all figured out. Like when that NOFO came out, we would not have had that grant application ready to go day one. I think we ended up, at the time we decided we were going to go for it, and when it was due, it was like 30 days. Henrico is the fourth largest locality in the state of Virginia. We've got about a $1.2 billion annual budget. We've got our own public works and roads division. So we were very fortunate to have a consultant on call who could immediately come in and help us out with the application. There are smaller localities in Virginia that don't have that luxury. And so if I were, a smaller locality or even a larger locality that didn't have those types of resources, I'd be looking at these technical assistants, because I see them as like a plug-in for what we did with a consultant. Now, obviously, that consultant was contracted and there was a financial aspect to that. So, but I think that technical assistance aspect is really huge for a locality who'd like to go for this, but maybe doesn't know exactly what they want to do or how to get a ready for prime time grant application going. And so I would be trying to get in line like really early for that, if I were in those shoes.
Okay, let me share. Okay.
Thank you, Matt. I would second what you just said as well. And what I did not mention is the local infrastructure hub program. I'll give a shout out to Krista Early, who's my colleague here helping run that program. So we are partners in crime on that, but we support communities that are not SSDN members as well. So again, this is one of the SSDN services that is open to any community, members and non-members alike. And again, that's Virginia down to Florida, across the Gulf states, and including Texas for the local infrastructure hub program. If for some reason you reach out to us, and Krista, are you able to put our emails in the chat?
Yours is already.
Oh, okay, great. If for some reason LIH isn't the right fit, we are happy to, connect you with other SSDN resources that might be a better technical assistance fit.
Okay, and also, I know I'm sharing my screen now. We talked about Clean Cities at the beginning, and there are Southeastern coalitions that can also help with a lot of the grant writing process as far as matchmaking and getting people, providing technical assistance, problem solving, helping you with funding opportunities, and helping you get to those disadvantaged communities, understanding where they are, and making connections with community organizations. We also want to provide the education and training in those areas as well to make sure that your regions or areas have all the necessary information. We have technical response service as well as Tiger teams that work on
for all the resources on the direct pay, because I was aware about being a business, for example, and getting, if you owe taxes, you could claim some of the credit. But now that we're in a municipality entity, it's great to know that there is direct pay to make it easier to get an electric vehicle. So yeah, thank you for sharing all the resources.
Yeah, happy to.
Yeah, Heather, go ahead.
Hey, first of all, I want to apologize if this was answered because I think there was a moment when I had to step away from my computer. But I wanted to know about the question about like cost share. So like if a federal grant requires a 20% cost share, which is pretty common, so like in a hypothetical situation, we'll use $100,000 because it's really easy math. Like, let's say that like, you're putting in place $100,000 charger and you can theoretically, and you can go and get federal funding to pay for 80% of that. So that's $80,000. And so theoretically, I know you can't profit off of anything. Can you claim the tax credit for like the $20,000 and basically come out even, or is that not allowed? Because most of the time with cost share, the requirement is that it be non-federal funding that you're matching. And initially you are putting in your own funds from whatever source, taxes, state funding, whatever. But then you're basically going and getting that money back from the feds. Is that allowed?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's not one I've actually come across before, and I'm not familiar really with federal grants. That's not really my area. So I would sort of think it's maybe like a grant requirement, not really a direct pay. But that is a good question that I can look into. But Dory or Emma, if you've got other thoughts, please jump in.
I've definitely had people ask me this question.
I am not positive of this, so I can also like ask some colleagues and get back to you. I don't think you can do that. I think the federal or the cost match has to come from you.
Okay.
But I can confirm.
And like to the extent, right? Yeah, like that is, I think, the instinct that I would have, like not based on any like law, but given that like many of these are going to be covered by like loans, which are collateralized, right? It is collateralized based on the tax credit. So like it's even if it's upfront funded by loans or whatever, like it's really funded by the tax credit. That would be my instinct.
Yeah, the only example that I'm familiar with where there isn't a tax or there isn't a cost share requirement, like with the electric school bus or with the clean school bus program from the EPA. So there is no requirement of cost share. You can stack and get, up to the money that you put in back.
If there was any way to look into that and like get back, like if you email like me or I don't know everyone on here. I know that some of the folks on here are also like in the Clean Cities program. Like I'd be happy to go and forward on that response to like the Clean Cities Network. And Renee might be willing to like forward it to all the other participants.
We also just sent the question in our programs team chat for the EC, so we might get a live response in a couple minutes. Anybody else have questions?
I'm curious if anybody in the group has started the process. Like, was anybody aware of it already and gone through?
The town of Leesburg did direct pay for our like electric vehicle, like the fleet assets that we purchased. That was a really simple process. It's the more complicated charging infrastructure that seems to be more of a concern to our staff, but the actual vehicles themselves were an easy process, surprisingly so.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's pretty consistent with sort of what we were hearing from folks, right? Like the low hanging fruit is going to be the vehicle purchases, and then the more complicated stuff like charging infrastructure or like solar roofs on charging infrastructure, like that's all going to be kind of next level.
Yeah, we're in that process right now for the vehicles, chargers, and a couple of solar installs. But it's slow going.
We're about to start the process. I'm curious. I work within the sustainability department. Who from your like financing or accounting team have you been working with? Is there like one point person? Are you working with a whole bunch of people? Because I'm not doing the filing registration and all of that paperwork. I'm just curious what other best practices are.
Yeah, I've been working with one point person on our finance team who is, doing the submission, did the pre-registration on that end, and I've helped to, gather all the documentation and with all the assets and things that have been put in place and gotten that over to her, and then the person in finance is doing all like the IRS and stuff.
And Rachel, what department are you in? Just so that I'm understanding the dynamic between the two.
Oh yeah, yep. Sorry. Yeah, I'm on our sustainability team, and we sit in general services department.
Thank you.
I don't know if you have somebody who already does all of your grant work, or if you guys have applied for grants in the past, but all of our grants go through our comptroller. They're the person who kind of regulates all the funding. And so I've worked in a couple different local governments, and that's tends to be how I've seen it work in the past is we go through that one person who already has to have all those credentials and details and tax numbers and things of that nature.
And then Deborah, are you point on like the sustainability side again, the way that Rachel is, to help provide like the VIN numbers and all of the details that you need for the vehicles?
For the most part, I helped walk people through the first time, but I'm a one-person department, so I try really hard to empower people to take the steps themselves. So we've kind of built that into our our procurement processing system. So when we get a new vehicle, it then, if the person checks that it's an electric vehicle, it gets automatically routed to that. There's like a arrow that says, do something with me. We're in Virginia, so we also get Virginia Clean Cities grant money to offset the cost of EVs. So there's a little bit more handholding on that aspect because it's a new grant application or a new rebate application every time. But for the most part, we tried to streamline the process so things wouldn't get missed. I mean, we have a goal to do our whole fleet, right? So I don't want to be filling out 145 VIN numbers every time a new vehicle comes through. And that would be my suggestion for anyone, is like try to streamline the process so you don't get bombarded doing things all day long.
That's really helpful insight. Thank you, Deborah. 'Cause I'm bringing back these points to the whole conversation in a minute, so.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's our plan too, is like, this is like the first year we've kind of done it, right? And so we're figuring it out, and then we're gonna try to hand it off to, you know, the finance team to hold in the future.
So for folks that are going through this now, I mean, Rachel and Deborah, and any others, but are you all able to do this without sort of outside tax advisors? It's been all in-house? Okay, so we've heard sort of mixed things from people that this is too much for, and maybe it's, you know, it's obviously jurisdiction by jurisdiction, depending on resources, but just curious.
Yeah,
I mean,
so far without any outside help. Yeah.
I mean, I will again reference, we only did the one that were like the vehicles, which were super easy, but we've been putting in RFPs that will get support on submitting these applications from everyone. So we're hoping that that will ease that burden, because I mean, we're a small jurisdiction and it was just me and the comptroller working through it. So hopefully it won't get more complicated than that.
And you know, hopefully over time, right, like, you know, as states who have greater resources and in many cases can help provide technical assistance down to local governments or other sort of arrangements like that is sort of the hope. I think we're going to be kind of pushing for some of those kind of things at the state level.
If you have technical assistance funding for that kind of work, there's a company, and I'm not associated with them anyway, but just as a developer, I've used them. They're called Novogradic, and they are one of the major primary sources for the IRA information that you, as governments, might need to access. So again, they are expensive and they are a for-profit company, but they are one of the leaders in the industry.
Yeah, I've used a lot of their resources in a couple of contexts. They've got a lot of public resources as well.
Cool.
And I mentioned in my presentation, Lawyers for Good Government, they're doing some one-on-one technical assistance too, depending on the situation and in their capacity. So that pro bono, they could potentially help out if they're more complicated projects.
Emma, have we had any response about the cost share question?
Not yet, no.
Okay, we got 25 seconds and then we go back to the main room. So if not, then we will try to get an answer and get back to the group. I know that the intent is to have the resources, like the recordings and all of that in an email to all of the participants. So it wouldn't be too hard to attach the questions that we captured and answered as well. All right, looks like we're heading back to the main room. Thank you guys so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. We'll get started just again momentarily as people are still entering the main room. I know we just had a short time in the breakout rooms, but just wanted to give everyone an opportunity to quickly debrief about what happened in each of their breakout rooms. And I believe I'll be turning it over to Dory first to just give a quick recap of what their breakout room discussed.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so we were in the breakout room about the tax credits, and the first was a comment that somebody was not aware that local governments were eligible to receive them, so they were thankful for the information. And then we started talking about the process of how local governments are doing it, and one organization's already started it, going through taking the tax credit, and this past year had a person in the finance department as the point person, and then the sustainability director worked together to get the tax credit complete. But another best practice that was kind of raised was that having in the procurement process a checkoff box saying like, is this an electric vehicle? And then adding the VIN in so that there doesn't have to be this constant back and forth between the sustainability team and the finance team. It would just be streamlined to go through the finance department. So we thought that that was worth mentioning and something that was brought up. And yeah, I will stop there because I know we're short on time. So I'll hand it back over to Renee.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And we'll hand it to Renee to recap breakout room 2.
Nick did a great job going over the offerings for SSDN and the LIH program. There were questions on eligibility for participating and getting technical assistance. And so I'm sure we've got a lot of technical assistance information coming out with our with this webinar. So we can provide that information with the results. Good stuff there. Just talking about, how you can be eligible and the offerings that we provide. Stop right there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Certainly partial to SSDN's local infrastructure hub. For those of you who might not be aware of it, certainly please don't hesitate to visit the website and learn more. But with that, we'll turn it over, I believe, to Evan for breakout room 3, IRA tax credits.
I'll jump in here, and Evan was assigned to another room, so I will just report out from what we covered in room 1, which was regarding getting ready for federal grants. And then Namita did a great job giving an overview of what the TICTAC is and what kinds of services they're able to offer as a TA provider. As well. And we got one excellent question from one of the breakout room attendees that we'll need to follow up with offline because it was sort of more technical and specific. So that's it from room 1, Michael.
Well, perfect. Thank you all. And a special thank you to everyone that was involved in this webinar, not only Watershed Consultants, Conservation Voters South Carolina Energy Office, Palmetto Clean Cities, the Region 4 South Carolina Hub, TICTAC for the Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Centers, Center for Budget Policy and Priorities, Henrico County, Atlanta Regional Commission, and others. I know I'm forgetting someone. I sincerely, Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, Electrification Coalition. And I will stop there and turn it back over to Renee to give us our final words today.
Wow, you can't do anything like this without a great team. And I just put the bug out there that South Carolina didn't get any of this funding, and look at what it produced. I am so happy and my heart is very full. Thanks so much, everybody on here, for your contribution. Could not do anything without any of you. So have a great rest of your day, and if you need anything from me, you got a solid coming from me. So
we will be sure to be in touch with the presentation as well as other resources, including the recording of the webinar. And I believe also Henrico County and Atlanta Regional Commission has given the okay to potentially share some resources about their application for others to know. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We will have contact information for all those involved in the planning for this webinar as well. So with that, again, thank you all, and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Michael and Renee.
Thank you,
everyone.
everyone.
Good job, Renee. Have a good